волны смерти омыли меня, и сети смертные окутали меня.
Грехов много.
Добродетели. Мои-то добродетели смердят перед Господом. Воняют прямо. Чувствую, как воняют.
Ну, ты чувствуй. А через этого и спасешься. Let me know.
All right, we're all set.
Cool. All right. Hey, welcome to PBF podcast number, I don't even know anymore. Today we're bringing Jay Dyer on. We're going to have a discussion about occultism with military and the intelligence community. I guess it's a perfect thing for Memorial Day or something. I don't know. But kind of ironic how that worked out. But it was like days off for us, so we figured it was a good time, and Jay had the time open. But it's great to have Jay come on here. I know that we've communicated for the past few years back and forth. We followed one another. For me,
a lot of spicy memes you put up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and because of those spicy memes, sometimes we're hard to find.
Yeah, right. You come and go you're like a ghost. You come and go.
Yeah, man. We're on. I think this is our 41st iteration of the PBF.
Wow.
Yeah. Because when we were back on Facebook, we were repeatedly getting zapped there. Now that was back in the day too. I mean, we were rude. We were trying to be, but we were rude about stuff when it came to the military. And so we got on people's radars. And actually, it was that stupid dude that, like, a bunch of the military guys had gone to Columbia, and they started up his dad worked for Fox News, and they'd started up their own little news site or whatever like that. But we would start nailing them, and then because his dad worked for Fox News, he had connections with Facebook, and like if we said something mean about him, we'd boom get deleted. Yeah, man. So that's what's kind of funny too, because for me, it's always been about honesty, right? And so, but it was kind of a nihilistic honesty, I think. But as I was starting to look at the world, and I was starting to look for what's truth and things like that, that's how I ended up stumbling upon some of your stuff. And like one of the first things that I really paid attention to was Tragedy and Hope, when you did that. And I bought the book because you were saying things that were in Tragedy and Hope that I was like, there's no way this is true. Do you know what I mean? Like, because it doesn't sound real. And would you just, since I'm talking about that, I can talk about it if you want to. Like, what is Tragedy and Hope?
Presidio Hope is a gigantic 1,300 page book written by Dr. Carol Quigley, who was some say basically the archivist for the Council on Foreign Relations. So he's kind of like the inner historian for the Western global power elite. And he was also the mentor to Bill Clinton. So he kind of trained him in terms of his intellectual enterprise. He was also a military historian, oddly enough. He's not like a geopolitical policy maker, but for whatever reason, they chose him to kind of be the strategist for how to raise and rear Bill Clinton into the global elite structure and make sure he was a good boy, being a bad boy. So that's Quigley. And then, there's a whole lore around the book that the original plates were destroyed, and he supposedly said too much. I don't know exactly how much is true out of all that. I'm not denying people's claims about that. I just don't know the lore behind the book. But I also heard these stories too, that it was given to CIA section chiefs in the 1970s to help explain, like, why are we funding communists? Well, here, read this book, So basically it's like a giant history of the 20th century from the perspective of the power elite. It was written, I think, in the 1960s. So it kind of ends, in the Cold War, but it is wild how much stuff is in there. I mean, he really packed it with, basically, of course, the banking elite are pretty much behind the wars, and they've constructed, a giant fiat scam system for the, Federal Reserve System to rape everybody, on and on and on, all the way to, we're going to build giant computer cities that are technocratic nightmares. I mean, it's all in there.
Yeah, it's like the whole idea that you're in a forced Hegelian dialectic, and quite often you're just looking for a jersey to put on, and how they control that with the media and propaganda. It's crazy, especially for both Doc and I, coming from that military background. Obviously, we joined the military thinking that we were wearing our jersey at that point.
We're
You know?
part of the good guys.
We not realizing that we were just working for the corporations and banks. So it's been
Right.
an eye-opening. And that's honestly like you helped bring me to that. And the irony of it too, as well, was, you know, like whenever you had podcasts on orthodoxy, I would totally avoid them. I was like,
Mhm.
I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to deal with religion. You know, I thought
Yeah.
that there was a way outside of religion. Like I could just, with rationalism, figure this out. But it was a podcast that you did with Tristan and with Jim Bob. It was on the boiler room with Hesher.
Yeah.
And on that episode, Tristan suggested getting the nihilism and then also the Orthodox Study Bible. Well, guess what? I got nihilism. I didn't get the Study Bible yet because, again, I was like, all right, I'm ready to read a book, but I made it through the second chapter of nihilism, and I was like, okay, he says everything I've been thinking and then more. He provides the whole framework from scholasticism through the Renaissance, through rationalism, up to now where we're at. And I was like, well, I guess I'm going to get that Orthodox Study Bible. And then
well, you know, it's funny. That's a good contrast between those two books, actually, because, you know, Tragedy and Hope also covers a lot of history and philosophy. Maybe not a lot of it, but like the beginning chapters and then the end chapters discuss the aspects of Western civilization that Quigley thinks that can continue on, and they're kind of like the worst aspects of Western civilization. So he's like, if we just had more libertarian economic freedom, and if we just had more, you know, I don't know, basic bits of liberalism or whatever he's arguing for, that's the hope, right? So the tragedy is the 2 world wars. The hope is that democratic neoliberal capitalism can, you know, give the world the best, what he thinks the best aspects of Western civilization. You contrast that with Father Stephen Rose's stages of nihilism and revolution, right? So revolution progresses from, you know, the 1700s up to today's just total, you know, denial of biology. You know what I mean? Like that's the end goal of where we are now. And so the contrast between those two books couldn't be greater.
Well, you know, and it's just, I had spent a lot of time reading Dostoevsky earlier, you know, when I was my agnostic stage. But when I hit Father Seraphim Rose, it just all clicked, you know, and then you can see like leading up to like Nietzsche and what came about in the 20th century, like the godlessness that led to all the wars and everything that we're seeing. And then like what you're saying too, as well, like now creating a many genders, genderless society, just creating that transhuman type of thing, you know, and that's the thing is like, I don't know how, number one, you know, because leading up to this podcast with the occultism, I ended up getting that book on the left-hand path. And, you know, just reading through people, like I've read some of these books at times, but it's often at a small type of thing. But to actually sit down there and trying to make notes of what's going on, like I can only make it 10 pages sometimes, and I got to put it down. It's like, these guys are so full of crap, you know, like they're so full of themselves. And I don't know what, like, you have read so many books of what's the opposition, and it's a library of information. I would suggest to the audience going to Jay's page, and then also Jay does host on what do you call on how do you describe AJ?
Lord Voldemort, right? Because you can't.
Yeah.
That was a joke that he was making when he first got banned everywhere. He was like, "I'm like Voldemort from Harry Potter, folks. You can't name me. You'll get banned. You'll get deleted if you name my name."
But it's a great too. You know, a lot of times on Friday, Jay hosts that. But you're doing like podcast almost every day too. Anyway, you know, various topics, and you've got some books too as well. But if you would just go ahead and before I try to give you your biography, maybe you can give us your elevator pitch.
Yeah, I get asked. I don't even know how to describe what we do anymore. Like, right? Like, so like we have a boomer family member, and he doesn't know like what I do at all. He knows that I do this kind of stuff, and like he just calls it. He's like, "How's your internet business doing?" Like the way that the boomer thinks about the boomer thinks about what I do is like just so foreign to them. But yeah, we do a lot of stuff. So basically we cover movies, we cover geopolitics, we cover philosophy, we cover literature. Now we're trying to do more lit and history just to kind of break things up. I get really bored if I'm doing the same topic over and over and over.
Sure.
So that's why you've seen such a cycle of topics that we've covered over the years. But yeah, we do that. I do the 4th hour of Alex Jones every Friday. What else do we do?
You got a live event coming up in LA as well, right?
Yeah, actually I have a whole bunch of events coming up. So this is weird because this year turned into the year of live events. So that was something that we kind of experimented doing at the advice of Sam Tripoli. He was like, do live, do. I was like, okay, sure, we'll try it out. I didn't think it would do very well, but it's been fun. It's like a side stream of income. But anyway, yeah. So we have a July 6th live event. We've incorporated like comedy, stand up, all the impressions, all that kind of stuff in the live events. So that'll be July 6th in LA. If you're in LA, you want to come out. It's going to be a lot of fun. We'll have Jamie Kennedy from Scream is going to be there. We did a podcast and hit it off pretty good. Had a good conversation. So we discussed doing a live event. Anyway, yeah, so I've written 3 or 4 books, three books. Working on the 4th book, 2 on Hollywood, 1 on philosophy. Yeah, so that's
book,
basically.
Is that what it is? The Red Book of Philosophy, or
the red one counts? Yeah. Well, the material in the little book's the same as what's in the red book. It's just 2 different formats. Because the funny thing about I didn't make the red book. Somebody else did. So it's a funny story.
Lulu.
Yeah, it's a funny story because I don't know who did that. Somebody just like took all of my essays and put them in a book, which I had no idea they did that. And I'd be like, it'd been nice of you to ask me if you'd done this first. Like somebody just did that. And then I tried to take it down like 3 or 4 times and they would just put it right back up. So I was just like, all right, fine, I'll just roll with it. So so that's where that book comes. It's not actually my book, but it is.
Well, Lulu's is cool though. I mean, unfortunately for you, I can see that's challenging, but I know like I've been able to find, like the Russian Martyr series.
Oh yeah, you can find crazy stuff on there. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's dude, tell you what, reading that Russian Martyr series, like I've got to read that a chapter at a time. When you're diving into what happened with Bolshevism, it's like it just gets you. You're like, okay, that's painful. But it's
that whole period is crazy. Yeah, and I don't mean to be. I'm not whining too much because actually it turned out to be a good thing that they put that red book together because they tweaked whoever did it tweaked it a little bit, so it's a little better format now. It's still kind of home done, but anyway. So yeah, that's what we do. We did a lot of debates, but we kind of. It's not that we got tired of debates, but it just got to a point where basically there weren't really any quality people from these other traditions that were really wanting to step up. And we kept reaching out. Like I would reach out to more of the top Muslims, more of the atheists, and it just kind of went quiet. Like we couldn't really get anybody to do it. So that's the main reason that the debates kind of subsided. But for a while there, for about 2 years straight, we were doing pretty hardcore debates with Matt Dillahunty, Stefan Molyneux, all the different Muslim guys.
Yeah, it's always funny too. It's funny, like in reading this book, it reminded me not necessarily on the debates with the Muslims, but sometimes when you hear the Muslims talk, reading the book on the occult, in really reading the way the occult writes things, how they like to, they'll throw Muhammad in there and then they'll say, but then he said, and then they'll do like the big long like Arabic thing that nobody has any idea, and then they'll tell you what it said. That's what the occultists remind me of at times.
Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting.
That's a good parallel. I have a question for you guys. So, like,
sure.
Did you have that? A lot of military guys I've noticed, like, they have a very kind of practical attitude towards things because it's like, well, this shit doesn't work, then I don't care about it, right? And so then that attitude is kind of applied to all of the fields. Like, oh, well, religion. Well, does this work? Where do I don't see this God? It's not practical. So. I mean, was that the attitude that you had when you said you had this kind of agnostic? I think a lot of us have that phase too, like, where was that your approach to the question?
Well, so I'll give mine real quick background, and then you can give yours too, man, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
Carlos. So for me, like I was born Roman Catholic, baptized. I grew up much more like my best friend growing up is a Lutheran pastor, and I used to hang out with him. But experiencing a lot of the Protestant side of things, it was like that. I reached a point of where I was just like, yeah, none of this. It didn't really come together. It didn't hold water for me, and so especially when I joined the military, and then dealing with and confronting things, the military side for me at a certain point seeing evil the way I saw evil, especially with a Protestant framework, I was like, okay, there can't be a God because you wouldn't allow this sort of evil. Obviously, with the background of the theology I've learned it a lot more with Orthodoxy. It makes a lot more sense because it's not that God allows that. Our rejection of God has created a world that's a godless world that allows evil.
Yeah, I have kind of some similar, very kind of pragmatic, kind of grew up Latino, so like I grew up Roman Catholic, became Protestant, and then just it didn't really kind of work out in that aspect. I was trying to apply things in like that theologically don't really kind of add up and don't make sense. It's like, how am I supposed to do all these things if I don't have the proper framework? I'm not fasting, I'm not praying as much as I should, and then I'm only saying what's on my mind, and most of the time it's like I have no clue what I'm saying. So yeah, I kind of fell out from a lot of that, like into like drug use and all this stuff, and eventually I was like, I'm just gonna join the military, and then that kind of gave me some structure, which was good. But then like you said, that was a good point of things became very pragmatic. It's okay, does this work? Cool, then we're gonna keep doing that. We're gonna try something else.
Yeah, and
if it
I
doesn't
mean, I think
work,
that makes sense. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
No, you're
interrupt. I
good.
was going to ask though, did you guys view military as? And there's a reason I'm asking you guys all this. I know this is like,
yeah, dude.
I'm not psyoping you to like flip the interview. You guys are like, what's he doing, man? This is psyop. No, so like a lot of guys join the military for various reasons. The weird thing is that in my case, my dad was like he loved the military. Like he thought it was so great. He worshiped it. And if he hadn't been so heavy on it, I might have actually joined the military. But like when you're a teenager and your parent, your dad like loves the military and he's always trying to push it on you, that's the last thing you want to do, right? You're like, like, nah, hell no, I'm not joining the military because you want me to. Well, but if he hadn't been that way, I might have, because I always had an interest in these kinds of things. But my mom was the opposite. She was always like, no, don't let him go in that. He's not made for that. Oh, it'll be all right. Anyway, so I'm curious, like, was it I just want to stop doing drugs and I want to clean up my life, or was it I want to get that money for college, or like what? Because I had a military family. That's the weird part. It was like I had a uncle who was like a super Cold Warrior dude, and my dad was like he wasn't an officer, but he was enlisted, but he really loved the Navy, and they were always pushing it. So I'm always curious as to why people chose to go into the military.
Yeah, for me, my uncle was in Vietnam, and like, so he was a Marine, so I kind of had that aspect. I always like helping people out. Like I grew up poor, so it was just like, and with even still with that Protestant mindset, we were helping other people who were in like struggling positions. And then as I kind of fell away, I kind of like started doing drugs, doing all this other stuff, and I'm like, I need to clean myself up, clean up my life. And I knew it was kind of give me a little bit more of like a structure and a bit more maturity, and then it did. But then it's also kind of like the 13th grade in a weird way, because there's people are very immature that it gets a little overboard. But sometimes, like, once you actually go to like deployable units and stuff like that, it gets a lot more serious, at least from my experience from like doing that, especially with like the Marine Corps and stuff like that, spending time overseas. You get that seriousness of like, no, hey, this training, like if you don't do things right, people are gonna die. And like it really kind of steered me a little bit more forward to every little thing that you kind of do matters. So it kind of set me up in a good way. And then eventually I kind of wanted to offer something else to someone, like if I was gonna get married and stuff, have some form of stable income and do that. So that's what it was for me. So it was kind of like a way out of my hometown, and then to do something better. But ironically enough, I stayed in California for like forever.
For me, man, so I was like a punk rock skater kid, really rebellious. And I'm still like in my own way. That's probably kind of what I think adds to sort of the character of, the spicy memes. It helps me to kind of come from that direction. I I was supposed to start college. I went to art school for a year. And I postponed it just for
You
a
sound
stupid.
like me, by the way. I almost went to art school.
I ended up doing a year, man. But I postponed it for a year, and then in the process of postponing it for a year, I had a vehicle that broke down, and it was going to cost me a ton of money. And I was like, you know what, man, I'm just going to give this a shot. And so I went in. I did all right on like the ASVAB. I had an opportunity. I wanted to go like into linguistics, but a lot of the stuff that I wanted to go into in that area was closed. So I went ahead and I like just chose a different path in doing that. And it was funny because when I was in the military, how many people I stumbled upon that had an attitude like mine. You know, there's a lot of my friends that were in like special operations community and things like that. And there was a parallel, a lot of the people, like those were real people, you know, and I got to know real people. And those are people like I'm still friends with now. I don't know if I've answered your question right. You know, it's just like, I didn't go into it like all gung ho, like, you know, Team America. But while I was in, I became like much more Team America. But when I got out for a while, I was hardcore Team America, you know, like, okay, this makes sense. As I rejected all these things before, this all makes sense now. And then it's kind of come back to like, then I realized I started wearing that jersey. You know, again, it was that Hegelian dialectic I was playing into.
Yeah. Yeah, I just always think it's fascinating to find out the motivations, like why people, you know, chose that path in life. And because sometimes every now and then, like you'll meet the people that are like, oh, this is, you know, my family worships this, right? It's like the greatest, highest, you know, calling that you could ever do. And then other people are like, oh, I was just, you know, trying to get laid, and I thought if I wore the uniform, like if I wore a uniform, chicks dig it, you know, just crazy reasons. Anyway,
If I show my dog tags at the bar, you know.
exactly.
Hey, we got to go
So
later.
I guess that ties into what you guys want to talk about today, in the sense that, like, you know, military is, in a sense, I mean, I'm not saying it's not it's an honorable, definitely a high calling, in the sense that to defend the country and all this kind of stuff, and to be a soldier is a noble, virtuous profession, and we know that from, you know, divine revelation, scripture, in many places and tradition. So, but we can also, I think, understand that these institutions can be corrupted and can be used for nefarious purposes. And there's always been, I think, some degree of a temptation maybe for people in the military towards something like Satanism. And the reason I think that is because, well, number one, I have a friend who's a Marine, Southeast China Sea analyst guy, and he loves military history. And he got me to get this military history of Western world by a guy named Fuller. And he was telling me the background of this guy, and they're like, oh yeah, he's like, oh yeah, this guy's like a famous military historian, but he's like a Satanist and all this stuff. And I'm like, what? What? He's a Satanist?
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, well, if you think about it, you know, the idea of the soldier being, you know, kind of a law unto himself, and you got to improve, like, it's like the extreme form of self-improvement to the point of self-worship, which is the philosophy of the Satanists. So I think that's where the overlap comes, is that there can be an extreme of this idea that I'm going to be the perfect killing machine. I'm going to train myself to be, you know, this super Nietzschean Ubermensch version of myself. And that overlaps with, you know, the satanic Nietzschean ethos to a degree, I think, is like one overlap.
Dude, I agree with you 100%. And that's like one of the things that I have found more difficult as I've been kind of moving along. And, well, I don't know, the challenge, I guess I should say, as I've moved along in my path of orthodoxy and like developing some more discernment, I guess, at times. But then I run into the egos of people where I used to thrive off of my ego. And I run into that with a lot of the guys that I've known at times. They don't have humility, and they just, like, their light, they see the light, but they think the light is them and not somewhere else, that they're not a reflection of the light. You know, they're focusing on that, and they're focusing on that in that very Luciferian way. It's so common. You know, I know at times, and that was the irony of it. It wasn't until, you know, in the last few years, as I've started to reflect on this, that there's people, oddly enough, that I would bump into who were occultists, satanic, things like that. And it was funny and ironic how many of them had ties they were part of like intel, like they were into witchcraft.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember years ago, I would go to, so like, my mom was a librarian and an editor. So I've always grown up with books. And anytime I go anywhere to a city, like I always go to the bookstores first. I remember years ago, like maybe in the early 2000s, like not too long after the Big 9 event. I lived in a town that's not too far from a pretty prominent, famous base. And it's like a military city, right? And so I would go to the bookstores back in the early 2000s, and I remember even then, like I would go to this bookstore, probably was a giant one, and I would go probably once every month. And I remember a consistent pattern of I was noticing a lot of the soldiers from the base would pop up in the occult section buying like satanic books.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I don't have any proof of this. I just always wondered, like, were they promoting this like at that local, I mean, I know the military's had like satanic chaplains, and they've had people like Aquino in there for a long time. But I was just always wondering, like, why are all these military dudes over here buying witchcraft books, buying Anton LaVey's books? It was a consistent pattern I would notice.
I think
So
like
when
from
I
my
saw it-
experience,
Go ahead.
was that like if you look at the like I just got out last year, so like it's still kind of fresh. It's like the way the system works is just like for promotion you have to have like a brag sheet and practically brag about yourself. So it's you're already feeding that egoistic kind of like mindset, and then everything's about yourself, the big things you are doing. So you start pushing it to that, and then a lot of people don't like to have that. That Christian kind of mindset of stuff. So it's just like, it's more, I guess, in an opposition, but it's like they try to find things to kind of, to be edgy. Honestly, a lot of people are kind of edgy when it comes to like a lot of military stuff like that. And even when it comes to like Satanism, some people are honestly some of the smartest and dumbest like people I've met have been like in the military, high IQ guys. And I don't know if it's just out of sheer curiosity, but then also there's been other events like Bible burning in Afghanistan because they don't want to proselytize, and little things like that eventually add up, that kind of plants that seed of just like, hey man, Christianity is nothing. So then they kind of start looking at all this occultism or even just the esoteric things like that, because you get bored on deployment, you meet people, you start talking.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of also opens
Yeah.
up that door into the occult, because I've had conversations like that overseas where it's just like you're bored and you've been sitting in a hole or you're sitting in a truck, and it's just like, okay bro, like, so what do you like? And then just you meet that one dude who's just kind of a little out there, and I think that's what opens up those doors, because people get really close real fast. So at least
Well, and
that's
it's
from my experience. Yeah.
And that LaVeyan style of Satanism is perfect for that, because it's like, we're Satanists, but we really don't worship Satan. We're atheist Satanists. We're just
Yeah, right.
worshiping yourself. It's like, it's a great gateway.
Yeah. And I think I can't prove this, but another theory I've had is that I think a lot of these cults, this is not a theory, a lot of the cults do have overlap with intelligence agencies, and they've been used in various capacities, and they've been breeding grounds for experiments and for finding wackos and patsies and that kind of stuff. I think that is true. But I wonder too, like, for example, I read a book a couple of years ago that was talking about, I think back in the 70s, that there was a experiment in the military where they were really trying to push on certain battalions, an experiment with getting them all into positive thinking. And they were trying to see if they got all the soldiers into Norman Vincent Peale and basically chanting mantras about how awesome you are every day, if that would actually work. But I just thought it was an odd experiment, but that tied in with the same time frame of the 1970s when they were really pushing the you guys have seen Men Who Stare at Goats, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that whole like Stanford Research First Earth Battalion phase of where could we train these Jedi Psi soldiers, right? Which I think the program was kind of a failure, but some of the aspects of it, like remote viewing and this kind of stuff, seem to be fairly successful. So one hard document that can be pointed to that we do know for sure is the whole Stanford Research First Earth Battalion stuff, where they started pushing kind of these light forms of occultism and experimentation in the military. The intelligence agencies were doing this too, but not just the U.S., but the Soviets had psi spies too, where they're trying to see, could we tap into psychic powers and train our soldiers to have remote viewing capabilities. And so those elements are known. Those are all declassified. And then there's the harder, crazier stuff, with some of the serial killer programs, Phoenix program. Can we weaponize these crazy people that we've profiled to be assassons? You guys know about Phoenix program and all that
Oh,
stuff,
yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Well,
that
well,
on arc as well.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the thing is too is like maybe you realize this probably, and I don't know how many people in the audience, especially when guys get into special operations, there's a whole psychological evaluation that goes into that. And I mean, there's psychological evaluations for different things, but specifically in the special operations community, they're trying to find people with sociopathic tendencies. Just the reality of it.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it's pretty obvious. I mean, and the books written on this are written by guys who were in the military, like Douglas Valentine, and he's very critical. And I don't necessarily agree with all of his conclusions, but because I think he kind of went into thinking like, oh, all of this Western stuff's bad, and so maybe Buddhism's good or something like that, which I don't agree with, but he does have a pretty technical, detailed account of what went down in the Phoenix program, and
that's interesting.
And it's not just him. There's also like Navy programs that have popped up in the mainstream media that have been mentioned, where it's like, yeah, we're going to profile and create assassins and all that. And I understand that the military has a degree of like that's part of what they do. So I don't even necessarily object to, because I'm not, I'm pro death penalty. I think that there's situations where you do have to engage in these kinds of activities. But the problem is that you get the door for just total corruption with these unaccountable, shadow groups that can use these things for, all kinds of self-serving, ridiculous purposes that have nothing to do with the defense of the nation.
Well, yeah. And it was interesting that you pointed out how he turned to Buddhism, because, in my exploration on the way back to Orthodoxy, I did go through sort of that Eastern type thing, because if you've seen the framework of Western civilization, which is primarily brought about, at least, the United States with, Protestantism and things like that, and then you see where it's led to, then you're going to look outside and try to see something like that, and we're not exposed, because I don't know about you. For me, Orthodoxy was just Catholicism, but the Eastern version before I knew what Orthodoxy was,
I think most Westerners think that, looking at it. Exactly.
Yeah. And so it's interesting too, to see, though, at the same time too, with that corruption that's created, I think, by the military, how then it leads to someone, like I'd like to talk about too, is Michael Aquino, a guy that ironically enough was born on the day of the execution of the Nuremberg trial members, and he considered himself one of the three beasts of the Revelations, along with Aleister Crowley. It's amazing. And even because I listened to podcasts with this guy prior to him.
I've listened to a lot of those too. Yeah,
his eyebrows are on point though, just
literally on point. Literally.
Well, you know what? We were watching a bunch of old horror movies, and we realized that, like, if you go back to the 1930s horror movies, like Boris Karloff, he looks just like Aquino. So Michael Aquino is literally just trying to ape himself from like old horror movie actors. Like, that's the look he's going for.
That's funny. I've got to look back at that. It reminded me of Grandpa Munster in some ways too, like a younger version of what I would expect Grandpa Munster to look like, because it's so over the top what he was doing, like when he was going on a holiday.
Yeah, it's like there's this extreme sort of delusion of grandeur, right? That, oh, by the way, those the beasts in Revelation, that's me, by the way. I mean, it's just super delusion. And then at the same time, there's like this clownish, cartoonish element to it, which is just kind of, it's over the top. But I think that for a lot of those guys, they studied and they were really interested in Hollywood. They were really fast, especially LaVey was very fascinated with Hollywood. So he was actually into the theatrics and the, carnival circus clownery. He thought it actually added to it. And I mean, Crowley has quotes about that too, where he was kind of like, you have to kind of live the part and also be kind of a clown as well. So
Yeah.
But anyway, I mean, I think that it's just a manifestation of, you know, intense delusion, and even in the midst of this delusion, they end up kind of looking silly and cartoonish to me.
Well, it's ironic then too that they met at the premiere of Rosemary's Baby, Michael Aquino and Anton LaVey in San Francisco. That's where they had their first meeting there. It's funny as you bring that up because of that tight Hollywood, because even LaVey was wasn't he actually some kind of a source for Hollywood movies in that early 70s satanic kind of thing that was going on?
Yeah, I've heard this debunked, and then it turns out to be true. And my wife just read a book on a biography of LaVey, by I think the woman that he had his first kid with. And no, it is true. Like he was definitely in the Hollywood circles. He was hanging out with Jane Mansfield, and he was hanging out with Sammy Davis Jr. became a member of that church. So he's in all those circles, and he did consult at least on a few movies. So that's 100% true. But to what degree these various actors and whatnot took it serious, I don't know. I'm not sure. But again, like you said, like the LaVey level of it is just kind of like, oh, we just worship ourselves, and this is social Darwinism in religion, in a religious form, is all it is. So, but the key thing I want to say there is just this point, which is that what I started noticing when I was reading about this years ago was, a lot of these people overlap with the military. Like a lot of these guys, a lot of these people are directly tied into military intelligence, CIA, and that's especially what we see with Aquino, right? Who goes on to become colonel, and then he writes this,
Mind War
essay, the essay, Mind War to Psy War, Psy War to Mind War, whatever it is, that talks about pretty crazy stuff. I mean, he talks about EMF, ionosphere, weaponization, spraying. He talks about how you can attack people at the cellular level through these different frequencies. I mean, it's pretty hardcore stuff in that essay. But yeah, and I also read his book. He has a book on black magic. He's like, let's take the principles of black magic and apply it to psyops. He's like, because all psyops is basically voodoo and sorcery, appropriated at the technological level for the military.
Yeah, and there's a quote on there that like kind of stood out to me on that, where it's like, mind war has nothing to do with deception, even selected, therefore misleading truth. Either states the whole truth that if it doesn't exist now will be forced into existence by the will of the U.S., which kind of ties back into the whole Crowley aspect of do as thou wilt. You know what I mean? It's like pushing your will onto others, and even in that, it's just like the pure manifestation of that is just like, bro, they're using this demonic will to push all these things, and they say it openly, and people are like, I don't understand how they fall into the psyop. It's like, nah, man, that's not what they mean. But it's like, yo, they say it here out loud, and even then, he's like, Mind War must reach out to friends, enemies, neutrals, anyone around the globe, and we're gonna use the media possessed by the U.S. because it reaches everybody. So it's like they're openly saying it. Yeah, we're gonna use all these things against you, and there's nothing you can do about it. And then when you question us about it, we're gonna be like, we're just writing, just ideas.
Well, and if you go all the way up to today, with the NATO cognitive warfare thing that came out a couple of years ago, it's all the same type of attitude and philosophy in that NATO thing, and they're saying the same thing, that, well, if we'll weaponize this against the entire population, and if you disagree with this, then we'll say that you're a cyber terrorist, basically. So, and the whole document is about transhumanism. It's like, we have to push nanotech, we have to push actual changing of the human brain and the human genome. So it's like literal transhumanist, Klaus level stuff in this cognitive warfare document. And a lot of that wording, all that phraseology is very similar to the Psy War to Mind War. Similar to, have you ever read that one, Mind Has No Firewall? Do you guys know that one?
I don't.
Not yet, no.
It's another one of those older PSYOP documents. I think it's from, I can't remember if it's from the Army War College or something, but it came out in like the late 90s or early 2000s. And it's about how the mind is kind of like a computer, and we'll basically weaponize all this tech to mind control everybody, right? Because the mind doesn't have any block, because when you open your eyes, the information is sort of pouring into your cranium through your eyes. So since there's no firewall there, basically we can weaponize information through the internet. It's basically what it's saying on a large scale. Like it's saying for everybody, like everybody has no firewall in their mind. And so the entirety of the web can basically be a weapon.
Sounds like the Facebook Meta dream universe.
Exactly. Yeah. And this is before social media, right?
Yeah. Well, but they were working on social media. The CIA was working on social media before Facebook came about. You know, like it makes me wonder, you know, with the early days, DARPA net and all the things like that, like how many people foresaw something like this, the ability of this. I guess it kind of makes me think too of, you know, when you look at like John Dee when talking to the angels and how they were trying to, with the Enochian magic, they were trying to create the future sort of thing. It's like how much of that was going on with the CIA and the DARPA and things like that.
Well, by the way, I found this document. It's 1998 Army War College. The Mind Has No Firewall. It's not that long. I recommend reading it if you haven't read it. But
yeah.
I should actually brush up on that one because I haven't talked about that in probably like 7 or 8 years. But one thing I noticed too is that a lot of the occult stuff, the overlap that it has with military intelligence and, you know, CIA and all that, is that it has to do with cryptography, right? So I think with John Dee, what happened was he realized that a lot of the Enochian magic, and I think that he did to some degree take that stuff seriously, because there's a book called Rosicrucian Enlightenment. It's one of the famous treatises on the history of the Enlightenment being influenced by Hermeticism, alchemy, and occultism. And in that book, she covers the how John Dee had an influence on the Rosicrucians, right? So before the Rosicrucians came about, John Dee and his Neoplatonic angel magic, right, was all about apotheosis. It was all about how through all of this you can achieve basically you can become God. So this actually lays the groundwork, as you guys probably know, for the ideas behind transhumanism and all that, you know, man can through technology achieve godhood. And the difference being that at that time, right, they're thinking, let's manipulate these symbols and use you know, formulations, calculations, and whatnot to transmute gold or base metals into gold. And that could be an allegory or a pattern for how we can take, you know, the right materials in the natural world to turn them into some sort of technology or vehicle for immortality. So this really does underlie all the transhumanist stuff, right? It directly goes back to John Dee and the alchemists and all these people. And this is actually from historians. This is not it's not conspiracy theorizing. But there's another element that I wanted to mention about John Dee, which is that he also seemed to have been creative in utilizing these magic symbols and sigils as a form of cryptography. So, you know, in terms of spycraft, if you want to transmit messages to the queen, one good way to do that might be through a cipher that other people have no idea what that is. And so that, if you know the history of cryptography, right, there's always been code makers and code breakers. And so the more obscure that you could make your codes with things that no one has any idea what these symbols mean, right, then the better the security is for the cryptography. So I think that was also a part of this, that he was a spy, right? A lot of people don't know John Dee was the first 007, right? So when Ian Fleming wrote the Bond stories, he's giving a nod to that by, you know, being aware of his own British intelligence history, that you know, John Dee was the first 007 because he would sign his letters with the 2 balls and the cane when he was writing to Elizabeth. So that's what I think is a big part of this story, is that a lot of the secret society stuff is actually spycraft. It's actually, I mean, I'm not saying there aren't people that, you know, there's people that take it seriously, but there's also people that are using it for other purposes. And that really gives us an insight into how the military and intelligence agencies would view cults and secret societies, right? It's a vehicle. I'm not saying it's only a vehicle, but it's a vehicle for intelligence stuff. And we see this also with Freemasonry, because Jessica Harlan Jacobs, who's a historian, she wrote a book called The Builders, and she just details how for the duration of the British Empire, basically, the Freemasonic lodges were their intelligence network. And there's certain movies that you can watch, like the Man Who Would Be King with Michael Caine and Sean Connery. I mean, you can tell they're basically just spies who are then scallywags out to just make their own money, right? But they're spies because they were Masons, right? So the lodges serve this function for the British Empire, right, as their intelligence network.
Well, and what's interesting, I think, too, that you've kind of touched on a little bit, but so the intelligence agencies are going to use the occultism to, basically help them with their craft, right? But I think especially when you look at it from the metaphysical level, is that those entities in turn are actually using you in such a way that's for the destruction of mankind.
At the end goal, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think
because that's what, like with the Enochian magic with John Dee, they're talking about bringing about a new age. Crowley's talking about that, and then even back to Michael Aquino, like he ends up in 75 having his own on the summer summer solstice where he summons the Prince of Darkness and creates his own
the Temple of
revolution.
Set.
Yeah. Where he's now rejected basically LaVey. He's going to help to bring about that new age. And
exactly, yeah. He says that his whole thing was the magician speaking the new word and the new aeon. But a lot of this too is just their own ridiculous, like, individual delusions of grandeur, because he was like, if you remember, he said something like, we thought LaVey was going to be the magus of the new aeon, but no, it's me, because I'm the one that's the real magus. It's like, and the thing is that in the Crowleyan system, one thing I learned by looking at the various figures who graduated from that is that you'll notice that many of them basically just start their own cult. And it looks like what that structure is there for is to basically train you in being an expert in religion making. Because if you look at L. Ron Hubbard, if you look at Gerald Gardner, who starts Wicca, Hubbard with Scientology, I don't recall to what degree Aquino was into Crowley, but it's basically the same pattern here, which is that at a certain point they get to the stage where they say, okay, now it's time to start my cult, and I'm the magus that has the magical word for the new aeon.
Well, that's
it's just graduate school creating a cult is all that stuff is.
Well, what's funny though too is one of the things, like every time I'd stumble upon when somebody's talking about Aquino, whether it's in a book or on a podcast or something, and they're like, and then he stepped down for like 3 years, like he steps down and nobody's ever done this before. And that's just the thing, because they're so egotistical, like it's so unheard of. And they make it sound like, oh, what a great guy he is. He stepped down. And it's like, okay, like it's so unheard of. And they make it seem like he's some kind of, I don't want to saint, but whatever they call it, he's a better demon than the other demons.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it's every one of these groups is like, we have the path to becoming gods, right? I mean, that's what all these systems are basically, just you becoming your own god, whether it's Wicca, whether it's Neoplatonic magic, or whether it's Crowley or any of these things. It's all this promise of exactly what Satan promised in the garden. You'll be God if you just follow my magical system and send me $200 a month, right? I'm just saying that while it's true that there's this dark component to it for sure, I'm not denying that. There's also a gigantic level of con man scammery involved, and that's one thing you notice is that like a lot of these people, they'll even brag about like how good they are at lying, scamming people. And then it's like, but then people fall for I believe the system. I've mastered the whole system. It's like, well, this guy says he's a liar and a con man, right? So is it possible that you got scammed? I mean, have you considered that angle?
I don't think they do, because then it's like, what's that old saying go? It's easier to fool someone than to tell them they've been fooled. You know what I mean? So they've already bought into it.
Crowley cites the P.T. Barnum quote, right? The fool's born every minute. Crowley actually
Yeah, that's
references
right.
that.
Yeah. And even then, like all the stuff that they write is kind of like it's. I know you've been doing the series, and I know you reposted an old video of it's all in your face, and literally, it's like you read the books that they write or the stuff that they put out, and it's super obvious when it comes to a lot of that stuff. And it's like, look, yeah, we're gonna use all these tactics because it's like it's my will versus yours, and I will use anything to subvert and to have my will and my goals forward in that direction. And if it comes to lying, deception, whatever it might be, it's just like they don't have that moral or ethical guidelines to be able to stop them, you know what I mean? And it's like when you don't
Yes.
have that, it just anything goes.
It's perfect for the CIA too.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's what you can see why this stuff's really good for those purposes. Yeah. Especially these kinds of, entities that are involved in black ops and that kind of stuff.
Well, when it comes to deception also, have you read by Smedley Butler, War is a Racket on that as well?
I've not read the book. No, I'm familiar with just, what happened with him and his, background and all that and the coup they were going to do, but I've not read the book.
It's good, but it's still kind of practically on that same line that you already know of the big military industrial complex, and that's really what war is for, is just for a massive profit and all that. But it's a good read, and like I know it's stuff that you kind of already know, but from that perspective of military and how they were, like you said, they were trying to prop him up, and a lot of the times you still see that to this day and age of just like, hey, we have this Medal of Honor high recipient or something, and they're gonna prop him up and use him as like a propaganda piece. But surprisingly, he kind of realized how he was about to be used. But even this day and age, people don't understand that it's still happening to today, and they've already attempted in the past. So it's like people just don't want to kind of see it, and it's tough sometimes, like because it's like being in the military and people, you have this perception of what you think you're going into, like kind of what we discussed earlier of like, hey, I want to join to serve my country and like, like fight for freedoms. But in reality, it's like you're just a tool being used by the military industrial complex for this endless war to have this continuous revolution. You know what I mean? Even funny enough, talking about Father Seraphim Rose, where nihilism, that's all it is. It's a continuous revolution until, it just keeps on going until the destruction of
that's why the
being.
that's why the neocon philosophy, and I think that we could say that the neocon attitude is pretty much what still dominates, and that's pretty much, the operating system that the system still runs on. I mean, Hillary was basically neocon, even when Obama's basically neocon too. And that whole philosophy is Trotskyite, right? So Trotsky philosophy is perpetual revolution, never ending revolution. That means never ending war. So that's where that comes from. And all the people at the Rand Corporation that devised this whole strategy, they were all a bunch of Trotskyite neocons, right? Herman Kahn, Volstetter, all those guys. That's where all that comes from, right? It's literally designed out of, Rand Corporation, military industrial complex strategies. But you're right that it goes back to what Butler was writing about, because that backs up Quigley. I mean, Smedley Butler's basically saying what Quigley said. But the only difference is that Quigley's not he's not saying it's a corrupt entity. He's saying, no, this is just the way it is, and it's good. He's an apologist.
Yeah, and a lot of people kind of miss out on that, and it's hard because it's like I care about like the dudes that are in, and it's hard to kind of give them that perspective of, look, bro, like I know it sounds like a conspiracy, but if you kind of follow like the track and you kind of look at it historically wise, then the most easiest of like, hey, just follow the money. Like you kind of lead to a lot of these similar conclusions, and I guess that's the hard part of trying to, like, I guess from our perspective at DD and then with PBF as well, is just like, hey, look, like we're going off mainline, even just documentaries, books and things that have been out there and things that have been declassified, like even just your CIA one that you did like a few I think it might have been last week, where they were the one with Charles Heston, where the CIA were openly, they were saying it's like, yeah, we do all these things in other countries, but we don't tell like people in government. We tell them just enough, but so they can't honestly, like, so they can openly deny and be like, yeah, I had no clue this stuff was happening. But it's like it's like if they're doing it overseas, they're doing it here, and it's like it's blatantly obvious. But that's the hard part of trying to get somebody out of that deception.
I was surprised how much was admitted in that mainline TV show with Charlton Heston. That kind of surprised me what was in there. I've been watching a bunch more of those too. There's a lot of little nuggets in whatever that show was, but the same thing, you're talking about lamenting, young guys. I had the same experience that you guys are talking about in terms of kind of what you think these institutions are when you go into them, and then you come out of it and it's like, it wasn't at all what I thought it was with academia, right? So when I went into academia, I thought, I want to be a professor. It's going to be great because it operates on the merit system, and if you're really smart and if you're really good at making your case and writing your papers and being a good teacher, you're going to cream rise to the top, all this nonsense. And that's not at all how the education system is. Like it's a giant racket as well. It's a giant brainwashing cult. And I think now everybody can see that with how bad education has got with all the purple hair, social justice, woke nonsense. I mean, it's just insane now at a lot of universities. Maybe not everyone. I know there's still a few universities are not that crazy, but I mean, when I was at the regular state university in the 2000s, it was already pretty bad, and you could tell it was like the writing was on the wall. Like it was like, this is definitely going to continue. It's going to get crazier and crazier. They're going to keep pushing more and more nonsense, and they're not going to let people. In other words, they vet you. That's what I'm trying to say. So if you're not on board with the total woke agenda, they don't want you having a PhD, right? And I remember telling people this in like the late 2000s, and people thought I was crazy. They're, oh, you're just being a dick. It's your problem. No, you're the problem. You're the dude. I'm like, it's not me. I'm telling you, it's like these professors are literally insane. They're like the most degenerate, just scumbag people. And it's you. You're the problem. And I'm like, no, it's not me. It's them. I'm telling you, like, I'm not reverse, like, I mean, I got a million stories of these just horrible professors.
It's the same thing in the military. And I remember I had boys back in the day would tell me the same thing. They're like, bro, just get your certs, get your education, and get out. They'd seen and I was like, nah, it's going to be okay. And it was the same thing. Like, it started getting more progressive, more diversity and all this stuff. And even just like my last year, it was so like, with the whole thing with the jibby jobs was just like, no, just shut up. Take it get out. And a lot of people were kind of forced up against the wall, and like it woke up a lot of people, you know what I mean, because there was an obvious like push to that, which I'm kind of grateful for that, because it kind of helped push me into, I already knew, I was like, okay, yeah, my time's here's done, bro. But even not just that, the obvious like Marxism and like some people really missed out on it, but when you have like higher ups from enlisted to officers that are like, don't even realize the things that they are saying, and they're just repeating the same propaganda that is just being pushed out through mainstream media, that is just like, look, bro, like, how about you actually look at it objectively and look at what things are? But instead it's just like, no, we're going to repeat all these points, and if you don't like it, then you're part of the problem, and then if you raise any questions, then you're kind of blackballed, you know what I mean? And that's kind of what happened to me in my last place.
That's how academia is, the same way.
Military is the same way, and it's just like at a certain level, like you rank up by doing like tests and stuff, but to go to the chief level, which is like E7, I don't know how familiar you are with like rank structure, but you do a test, but then you're also selected. So you do like a whole board and everything, and then like
they're vetting people. Yeah,
they're vetting people, and if you're not drinking the juice, then it's like, bro, you're not gonna make it. And I know people who were at that level that were just like, bro, like, I'm honestly embarrassed, like, of like the type of people that, how quickly everyone just like lockstep, you know what I mean? We're just like, oh, that's what we're doing. Well, that's what we're doing. But deep down inside, they knew it wasn't true. And I'm like, bro, then why are you going with it, dog? Like, where are you going to draw that line? Like, you've already sacrificed this much. You've already given in this much. Like, I pray that they repent and that they turn away and they kind of realize it, but it's kind of going back to even just what Alexander Solzhenitsyn was saying. He's like, hey, yeah, I knew all these things, and if I would have just done one little thing, like, it's my fault that things got this bad, you know?
There's a lot of cowardice. Like, I mean, a lot of people are cowards, and they're scared of anybody, saying a mean thing about them. It's just amazing how weak people are. Like,
they want everybody to like them.
Yeah.
That's what motivates them.
That's not very Christ-like saying that.
Yeah. So
Christ was nice to everyone. Oh, was he?
You
Right.
den of vipers, you empty
Yeah.
tombstones. Yeah.
Well, it's just like there's a Jesus in my head that's the Jesus that's nice, and he's like a hippie dude, and that's the real Jesus, and that's the one I fought. It's like, no, that's the one you made up in your head, dude.
Yeah, and it's honestly like kind of sad that it's just like, bro, like you say you're about freedoms while he's coming back to the military stuff. It's just like, but you were so easy to just stomp on everyone, and that wasn't like going with it. But yeah, like this whole buddy thing is just like, no, there's you can still be objective and be loving and still correct someone. Like,
Well, you know what's interesting? You know, when you're talking about some of these things with academia and then the military, because again, you know, Michael Aquino, he's a guy that went on to get his PhD. He was a college professor.
yeah,
And, you know, it's another one of those things that people push him, or, you know, they say about him is just, oh, look. And like, even there was one of the quotes that I heard about him is, why do you trust a guy who's an open Satanist? Well, he's not a homosexual or a druggie, and he's open about this, you know. And here's a guy who was part of the, and I don't know, like, I'm curious, Jay, that whole satanic panic type thing, because I dove into a lot of research on the stuff that went on, like Presidio and a lot of things like that. Like, what's your perspective on the so-called satanic panic?
That's a
Jason?
good question. Actually, somebody brought this up the other day, and I was thinking how it'd be good to comment on this, because I think it's a little more complex than, you know, I'm not saying you're saying this, but a lot of people think of it like, oh, it was either nothing going on, or, you know, I think that there was layers to this. So, for example, one of the books that came out is called Michelle Remembers, and that was one of the early books that helped kick off the Satanic Panic. And I think that she was exaggerating her story. It was pretty extreme, and she put a lot of things in the book that were kind of just kooky and ridiculous. But it kicked off this panic, and I think that in the, you know, a lot of this panic was driven by not just the media and Geraldo and this book, but it was also driven by kind of goofy evangelicals, right? So that's a component to it, which, you know, evangelicals at times will have this kind of overly what's the word I'm looking for? They'll just be kind of superstitious about stuff, right? Like, I get this even still, where it's like people, you know, oh, you know, you use this symbol in your thumbnail, so you're secretly a Satanist, right? So there's this element of like idiot evangelicals that will obsess over these kinds of things, and there's no nuance, or there's
it's like a paranoia.
no understanding that the symbols have multiple, what's called polyvalence, right? They have different contexts, different meanings in different contexts. So part of it is that, but there actually were cases of actual satanic ritual abuse, and, you know, this has come out over time to declassify things about the finders, for example. That was going
Well, you
on.
know, would you talk about that a little bit too? Because I don't know that everybody knows about the Finders cult. Can you give a quick background of that?
This was basically a CIA-run cult that was involved in trafficking and mind control. It had this weird New Age flavor to it, and it eventually got sort of broken, busted up. I can't remember who was the first to expose it. I remember there's a chapter on it in Dave McGowan's book on Program to Kill, but it tied into a lot of stuff adjacent to the Franklin scandal, which is out of Nebraska. You had these high-level GOP people that were engaged in a lot of high-level lobbyists and people like that were funneling money and trafficking kids, and it involved satanic rituals with Larry King, who was like this black GOP dude out of Nebraska. And that's been written about in multiple books by Nick Bryant. And
was that like, was Boys Town in Nebraska part of that too?
Yes, but Boys Town
Yeah.
was part of where they would get the boys.
Yeah.
And that was the local Catholic Novus Ordo priest who was funneling the kids from Boys Town to these parties. By the way, same model that, if you notice in the recent German satanic scandals of the Roman Catholic Church, where the nuns were taking kids from the orphanages to be raped by the German business elite. Have you seen that one?
No, that's kind of new one to me.
Yeah,
Is
no,
that,
look
like,
that
recent?
up. Yeah, that's like
Yeah.
well, I don't know how the abuse had been going on, I think, for a long
Yeah, yeah.
time, but it came out in German media, and then it went everywhere else in the media within the last year. So that's a
And
famous
that's crazy
case.
too, because you had like the East Germany thing too, where they were taking orphans, kids, and putting them in with known child molesters. Like Germany,
Yes,
so
same
whack.
yeah, it's crazy.
I mean, even like
But,
the whole Finders thing, like people aren't like it's been declassified in the FBI vault.
Yeah.
We made a post about it the other day, and people are like, "No, bro, you're crazy." And I'm like, "It's literally been declassified, and it's in
It
the
was
open.
just
You can look through all the
declassified
notes." Last year?
2 years ago.
Yeah.
Last
Yeah.
year, yeah, exactly. But the funny thing is that even though it was just declassified, like a bunch of people were writing about that for like 20 years. I mean, it was a
Mhm.
well-known thing.
Well,
and I
but
first
wasn't one of those types of things where it's like, oh, but that's a conspiracy theory, like everything, right? Like, let's come at it, let's hit it really hard, let's say that this is all a lie, it's all a conspiracy theory. And then once you've got people accepting in their minds that, oh, this can't be real, we'll go ahead and put the truth out there. And then, it's that distorted reality that they create for everyone.
Yeah,
Well,
it's they do that. That's a technique too, where it's like they do the same thing with, oh, Bilderberg doesn't exist, and then it's like, oh, okay, yeah, it exists, but it's a good thing, right? And why do you hate it? So,
And here's why it's a good thing.
yeah, right. Yeah, like
Yeah.
liberal article titles, right?
Mhm.
But yeah, so the Finders is one. I mean, and there's just so many of these that end up popping up. Like I can't even keep up with all these different groups and circles. You'll lose your, there's just so many cases of this. Like the scope of it's kind of hard to believe, and how they were doing all this stuff. But those are the famous cases from like the 70s and 80s of the Franklin and the Finders, and there's usually some kind of ritual element to it. And to get back to the Satanic Panic, so you're correct. Like there's these real elements that are going on. I went actually pretty deep into some of the serial killers because that actually ties into the Satanic Panic. Because if you remember, a lot of the serial killers of the 70s and 80s, it would come out in the media that they had these, satanic connections, right? Most famous would be Richard Ramirez, who was openly a Satanist. And then he had this military relative, I think it was his uncle, who supposedly, I think he was like a Green Beret or something like that, but he's the one that got Richard into Satanism. And Richard actually went and met LaVey at one point. Yeah, he tells the story about it. But that was part of the Satanic Panic, and then kicking it off. I mean, getting it going. And then Geraldo, interestingly, he did that show, a series on Satanism, and this was one of the key catalysts. I think Oprah did too, but Geraldo's series that he did on the Satanic Panic, I think you can go watch these on YouTube. I watched them years ago.
Yeah, Aquino's on there.
Yeah, Aquino's on there.
Board. Yep.
And he does one on Bobby Burdella, the serial killer.
Oh yeah.
And it turns out Bobby Burdella actually was a Satanist, and he basically had his own little satanic cult. And he was, basically doing BDSM and killing people.
Yeah, Bob's Bizarre Bazaar.
Say what?
No, he had a store that was called Bob's Bizarre Bazaar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Correct. But it came out too that he had his own little like Satan cult, right? So he was the head of it, and there was like 5 people, right? So it wasn't like a huge underground thing, but it tied into all the, just the weird underground BDSM stuff that was going on. And anyway, long story short is that he actually was into that stuff, right? So Geraldo's documentary, kind of made it sensationalized it, but there's actually many of these cases it was true, right?
Well,
so then you have these people coming out with claiming that they had been abused, and they were getting this from their repressed memories, and they were doing like regression hypnotherapy and all that, which I think is a little dubious.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that it wasn't happening, because there was also the McMartin preschool trial, which if you look at that, it's pretty wild. I think that was definitely something going on. And when they declassified that information they were talking about, the Finders, they also declassified that there actually were tunnels underneath the McMartin preschool. Yep. And that's relevant because for so many years, mainstream media had said, that was not true. It was all made up.
Well, wasn't it the same thing in the Presidio case that there was like another building
Correct.
next to there that had underground tunnels? And ironically enough, it was not the actual like place where they were kidnapping the kids from. It was that next door building that got shut down.
Well, there was
Yeah.
an old like bunker or something
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
World War II, and it was behind the Intel building where Michael Aquino worked, and they had a bunch of like scrawlings on the wall in there too as well, and something like with the Prince of Darkness, if I recall. And and to go along with that Presidio case as well, there were Michael Aquino claimed that during the time that he was supposed to have been molesting the children, that he was in Washington, D.C. And then he later, he said like, oh, well, it was proven, that, like I was in D.C. So they no. The San Francisco police said that we don't have enough evidence that says that he was actually here, but we can't prove that he was actually here molesting kids as well. But during that time, 4 kids came down with chlamydia at the Letterman Hospital in San Francisco. And there was anywhere from 60 to 100 kids where there was valid information that children were molested. Now, on top of that, some of the interesting aspects of that whole thing was that the daycare at the Presidio on, I think it was the fall equinox or fall, whatever, September 20th, September 22nd, whatever, that building burned down. There was $500,000 worth of damage to that building. And then the classroom of one of the guys who was actually at the daycare center, that also burned down. And both of those were arsons, but they never actually pinned the arson on anyone.
Yeah, I mean, similar stuff in there was another case I was trying to think of that where there was a similar pattern. Oh, speaking of the when this was all popping off in the 80s, the reliance on the memories of the kids, right? So like in the McMartin trial, you had all of these kids basically describing commonalities, which is really bizarre for 3, 4, 5-year-olds to be describing the same people and rituals, right? Because they were saying, oh, well, these kids have just sort of imagined this.
It was the false memory syndrome foundation.
This led to I was going to talk about Martin Orrin and the false memory syndrome. And that was actually set up, that was a CIA aided thing to set up to disprove all of the claims of the kids. And that, oh, you're just having false memories. But it turned out that they were a bunch of creeps and weirdos too. The people that were running the Martin Orrin was himself a creep.
He himself had been accused that he was molesting his own daughter, and then him and his wife were part of the board, and other board members were part of professors that were part of MK Ultra, low key on
Correct.
that, Monarch as well. And a lot of other people that have a lot of connections to these other bigger groups as well. So yeah, it's kind of funny. It's let me create this whole foundation to cover me up.
Yeah, so I think that's when we look at it from that angle. Now think about today, dude. I mean, there's now tons of people. I mean, I don't want to over exaggerate it, but so aren't there giant groups of people now that are openly calling for Satanism and pedo stuff to be legal?
Well, and the thing is too.
So why is it? So wait a minute, they're all openly doing it, but if you talked about this as a thing in the 80s and 90s as a conspiracy theory,
right? Yeah. And they also laid the groundwork too, almost like these people, like Michael Aquino was a martyr. You know what I mean? Because it was just the big bad Christians and the FBI.
They say it was the Christian right wingers after him. Yeah.
And this guy who will admittedly lie to you to your face is a martyr. But that's such the inversion of the world too as well. But I think it's kind of crazy too, because when you look at the whole concept of Project Monarch too as well, the concept of you're trying to take a cocoon, a young child, and then form it, which sounds like maybe what happened with Richard Ramirez, but it sounds to me like that's, especially with Michael Aquino's involvement in Vietnam, he was actively monarching, he was in the act of it with his wife doing this, because the amount of information that they had on the Aquino place. That's one of the interesting pieces on that, the whole Aquino thing. When they showed up there, they brought the girl there in the neighborhood, and she actually led them to the house where Aquino lived. And what was interesting is Aquino owned the house and then the house next to it, but they only searched the apartment on the top floor. They didn't search anything else, nor did they even search the building next door. And so there's potential for information here that wasn't even included. And some of the prosecution didn't move forward as well because, like one of the kids that was molested was 2 years old and he couldn't testify. Well, big surprise. A 2-year-old's not going to be able to testify. But they make things almost so bizarre sounding, like the whole activity of it, because there were, one of the girls described it as that they were cross-dressing, where Aquino and his wife, Aquino was dressing up in women's outfits, and then his wife was dressing up in men's outfits as part of the ritual.
Yeah, this is to cloak it, right? So that if anybody talked about it, it sounds ridiculous, right? I mean, it doesn't sound ridiculous today because that's...
You see
but
it
what
every
I'm
day.
saying. Yeah, right. But at that time, right, it was like, oh, what, and then wearing like, they molested me wearing Mickey Mouse suits or something like that, right?
Yeah, that's like a whole
Yeah,
furry
that's
thing nowadays.
I think. Yeah. And also, you're familiar with Paul Bonacci and all the stuff he said, right?
I'm not.
Yeah, me neither.
So he's the one that was implicated in he's one of the young boys that was involved in all this. I mean, this is known, and he was implicated in the Johnny Gosch situation in terms of all the Franklin cover-up. Well, you can watch, unless they pull it off of YouTube, but you can watch the like the lawyers getting the statements from Bonacci.
Yeah, I just found it here on YouTube.
He talks about
Franklin scandal deposition.
Yes.
Paul Bonacci.
So
Okay.
Bonacci talks about Aquino, and he's like, yeah, he was involved. He was the one doing this to us. So that's another. Now, I mean, that's his claim, right? I mean, I'm not saying it's true because he said it, but
yeah,
like he is a known Franklin person, and he's saying that, oh yeah, Aquino's involved in this.
Didn't they also do a raid on Aquino? But I can't remember what came out of what they found in his house. Like they found tapes of like some really weird occult stuff, but nothing ever came out of it neither, if I remember.
That was the thing too, because you stepped away for a bit. And what I had mentioned then was that they only searched the top floor, which was the apartment that he and his wife, their residence, if you will. But there was other apartments below. It was like a 3-4 floor house, and then they also the house next door to it that they never searched as well. They uncovered things too. It's funny, like when I was reading some of these things as well. Well, when they found Disney videotapes, and it was like, well, yeah, in the occult world, they always like to say that, there's this hidden child of Michael and Lilith. Well, his wife's Lilith, oddly enough. But that, well, why wouldn't they have this? But there's never been a kid proven to be around. So that the excuse was like they had this kid that they were trying to keep from out of, the eye of society and everything like that, keep him undercover. And so that was the reason why, of course, they had Disney movies for the kid to watch, when in fact there was probably something else going on.
Gotcha.
It's insane, man. It's insane. And
it was the same with the McMartin's story too, with the weird Disney stuff and the plates that they found, underneath the house and all that.
Talk about that. I'm not fully familiar with that.
Well, they bulldozed it, and they found pentagrams that have been drawn on plates. They had, but there was also like Disney paraphernalia and that kind of stuff when they were dozing the ground underneath the McMartin preschool where the tunnels ended up actually being. So, yeah. In other words, why would there be these things? When you bulldoze this place, which is supposedly all good, nothing wrong with it, right? Why would there be in the ground, plates with pentagrams drawn on them?
Well, obviously,
and Disney stuff.
It's very innocent. Why are you Christians picking on these poor Satanists?
Yeah, Disney has its own tunnel system as well. Like it's intense. Like my brother-in-law, he was DJing over there in LA, And he would tell me, he's like, yeah, bro, like there's underground tunnels that just like it's a whole nother system. It's like a whole nother town and city. And it's like, so if all this stuff is kind of interconnected and stuff that most people wouldn't know about, you know what I mean? He was telling me, he's like, yeah, like we just drive underneath, we show up to wherever, and just like that's how celebrities get around in Disneyland as well. And I was like, what? And he was like, yeah, like if you want low key stuff, they just use those systems.
Yeah, nothing sus about that at all. It's all on the
Yeah,
up and up.
definitely not.
There was an
how
article
many-
I was trying. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, how many child molesters end up working for Disney, like at all levels too? Because I remember something maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago, where it was a guy who was a senior VP for one of the Disney, I think it was even like the studios or something like that, where he was in meetings and he was talking to an FBI agent or something like that, and he thought it was like a 12-year-old girl, you know. And it's just it's ironic how that just keeps reappearing in so many different ways as part of this.
Yeah, there's an article I have somewhere about the whole story with Bonacci, but I can't find it. There's also an article you should look up. It's pretty famous now because there's not a whole lot of these, but there was a psychiatrist guy named Greenbaum, and he gave a lecture at a big famous psychology conference. There was all these, you know, so-called establishment experts. But he actually gave a talk in 1992 about satanic ritual abuse. It's called the Greenbaum speech. You should look that up because it's a mainline, you know, psychiatrist guy basically talking about all the stuff that we're talking about. Monarch. He talks about the intentional splitting of the personalities through ritual and electroshock. He talks about triggers. He talks about MK Delta. He talks about color magic. It's an important document in this whole story because a lot of people act like, oh, well, you know, if any of this was true, at some point there would have been mainline, you know, psychiatric people talking about it. Like there are. So what are you talking about? There's another thing I'm trying to find that's it's a thing I found. I think her name is Elizabeth Voss, and she wrote a really interesting article on the connection between Bonacci and
Was it Boss or Voss? I'm sorry, V or B?
I'm trying to find VOS, Elizabeth Voss,
Okay.
I think. And it's an important article about,
Oh, the Finders.
it might be that one, but does it talk about the weird creep that was grabbing the kids? And I think there's something about Bonacci in that.
There's a lot here with her.
I think it's whatever we find about Bonacci, Paul Bonacci. Her thing on Paul Bonacci is the one is what I'm trying to find. Because it gets into how he was kidnapped. It might be this one here at Consortium News.
Did you ever see?
Anyway, if you look into her, she's got a lot of good stuff on this. If you look into her articles.
All right,
I
yeah,
can't
that's something definitely we'll have to dive into another time.
Yeah, but it's related to everything we're
Yeah.
talking about. She has good stuff on this.
Did you ever hear though too where Aquino was actually tied potentially, like, and I don't know, like that Johnny Gosh, his mother claimed that Michael Aquino bought Johnny, like somebody came to her and told her that he was involved with that, because there was implications too of Aquino.
Yeah, I think that's what Bonacci says in that deposition there.
See, that's interesting too, because his mom said that and she'd been contacted separately, and there was even things at West Point, you know, the military academy for the Army, where kids were molested around the same time. Like, and what are just the chances of these kids randomly saying that stuff? I mean, and then to see all these levels of the Franklin schools, and but again, you go out there, you make sure that the rituals and things that are occurring, you take it so over the top so that when the kids talk about it, this can't be true, and that way it can just easily be discounted.
Yeah, and they also, basically give kids ketamine, LSD, and all kinds of drugs. So that's also why it sounds crazy.
Well, because there was a recent incident too, and there was a guy out in Utah, David Hamblin or something like that, who was part of the LDS Church, a
Oh,
Mormon.
you talking about the recent Mormon SRA abuse?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's
And
another one. Another one.
this is a guy that he's a psychologist, and he was a counselor, and he was counseling like guys on their homosexual tendencies. And what he would say, and here, hey, if your kids are listening right now, prepare, because like he would use his semen, which was righteous semen, to help cure these men of their homosexuality. But he was engaged in
Whoa.
using mescaline, peyote, ayahuasca, and things like that to help cure various different things with all these different Mormon people. He was molesting his daughters, and that's all come out very clearly, like this has been proven. And he was also just with his wife abusing men as well. Like it was just whatever sexually could go on. And this is very recent. This is like 2022, and he was just released on bail in like March or April of 2023.
The system works, brother.
And I guess at this point too, we'll have to be sympathetic for him, because he probably engaged in this Satanism as a reaction to the Christians that were treating him poorly or something.
He was being persecuted by the right wingers.
Yeah. As much as the Mormons get persecuted by the right wingers, although I think they did.
Wait,
go
isn't that like basic criminology too? That people that get busted and caught with these things. So suddenly it's like, oh, it's not my fault, right? I'm being persecuted. The systems, like every criminal does this, right?
Yeah, man.
I've never done anything wrong. It ain't my fault. That we were just watching a bunch of old movies where like the villains are all doing this, and I'm like, this is basic criminology. Doesn't everybody know what they're like? So it's like, it's not bad because it's not my fault, because and it's weird because the same people who, on the one hand, are like, the supposed satanic philosophy of take responsibility for yourself, and you determine your destiny. You're the captain of your destiny. All this stuff, and then it's like, it's not my fault. Like the system made me what I am. It's like, I thought you're supposed to take responsibility, right?
Yeah. But that's, I guess, part of the idiocracy too, as well. It makes it easy that people don't even realize that, right? They can't fundamentally see how these things are being done. Like they know it on one level, but when they look at it, they can't see it for what it is.
It's cognitive dissonance of just like, hey, accept responsibility when it's good, except when it's not. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Shift all blame, and then just build a whole use all these programs, false memories. Nah, man, it's not what you think it is. Like it's completely false. Like you're remembering it wrong. So it's just you start gaslighting everyone around you.
It is gaslighting. Yeah, it's the same. It's just like with Bilderberg doesn't exist, right? And you're crazy. Bilderberg exists, and so what? Bilderberg exists, and it's a good thing, and you're a bigot if you hate it.
Yeah, and that was like going down that rabbit hole too of just like, okay, military industrial complex, and they connected money wise. Okay, who's funding them? Oh, it's going back to the banks. But then it's like the Fed Res, and then it's like, well, who owns the Fed Res? And it's like, well, these groups don't exist, but these people kind of got together on Shekel Island, but it never happened. It's so insane, and it's just like, look, it's clearly are there. Like, what? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills.
Well, when I first heard that John C. Lilly says that he was, testing LSD on kids, I didn't believe that. I was like, what? That sounds crazy. And then you get his unreadable, crazy book, and he's like, yeah, he was testing LSD on kids. And I'm like, okay, so if they're funding Alfred Kinsey to, molest kids, and if they're funding John C. Lilly to give LSD to kids, like nothing, like sky's the limit, right? Nothing else is unbelievable, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny too, like with Kinsey, right? Like he's portrayed in the media as some kind of hero when the guy literally was molesting children. He was causing orgasms in children. Why? Why is an adult under some sex?
Oh, for science, bro.
Yeah.
We have
Well,
to
that's what-
understand the
well,
science.
Trust the science, bro.
Exactly.
Who peer reviewed that study? That's what.
Yeah.
And then that
Oh,
goes
man.
into another rabbit hole of just like, oh well, we know it's good because it's peer reviewed based on this study. What study? And then you actually read
Peer
it.
reviewed by the finders, right?
Yeah. I was having that conversation with, well, not about that, but it's like if you actually read studies that is based on, like even just like the whole thing with like the SSRIs, right? Like that came out, that was debunked. Like a peer-reviewed study is like, hey, the study that you guys used like 10 years ago that there's a chemical imbalance in the brain, a serotonin imbalance, it's like it's shoddy at best. And they couldn't replicate it. So it's like that's why all these things aren't working. But then if you go down the same line of like, look, if you give these...
speaking of peer review fraud, this is not really, this is just a little side anecdote that you made me think of this, that somebody did a study, I don't remember, somebody on Twitter like went and did some kind of Spurg study where they went through all the footnotes of the New Atheist, and like 80 to 90% of all the footnotes, which were supposed to give it all this academic, they were just citing each other. So basically they're just like, their books are just padding all their shit by citing themselves. It's crazy.
Peer review laundering, like that's all it is. They just launder one another.
Who was that dude that what he was making up a bunch of stuff for the peer review, and it was like a lot of anti-white like stuff, but he was doing it on purpose. I can't remember his name. It was that comedian, and he exposed.
There's a bunch of these.
Yeah, he
everywhere.
exposed that it's like, look, as long as you're going with the current narrative, you can put whatever study you want, and as long as it has the certain in thing right now, it's gonna get approved. Like it's insane. Like I know. Yeah.
I've started when I was in academia, right? Like, I started noticing a lot of that fraud, and I was talking about. I mean, I'm not trying to take credit. Like, it's not like I was the first person saying this, but like in academia, you can see how it works and how much deception and bullshit it is. And in the 2000s, if you talked about that, people say you're crazy. But then, eventually it starts coming out, and then the Lancet does this whole Chatham House publication where they're like, oh yeah, by the way, 50% of scientific literature is fraudulent. That's like the most prominent journal, the most prominent medical science journal in the world says it's all 50% of it's fake.
Well, I think the best too, and I know you've done some podcasts with James Lindsay, but him, Helen Pluckrose, and then Peter Boghossian. They did that grievance studies, and like they were doing things based on like the dog rape at dog parks, and like these were fully accepted into the academia, and they won awards with the outlandish things they came with, and these are all leftist too. Well, I don't even know where they sit now at times, right? Because James Lindsay, he's in a kind of a weird place. Because he seems to be a Trump supporter now.
Well, he's really and really wedded to classical liberalism. So
yeah. Which that's a I used to try to tell people I was a classical liberal, and now I tell people I'm a traditionalist, because I don't think classical liberalism is willing to account for the metaphysical reality. And it seems like James Lindsay is kind of flirting with that at times, and you see that with a lot of people who call themselves atheist, agnostics, whatever. Where they're like, something dark is happening here, and I can't account for it in the material reality.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, classical liberalism is posited on basically anti-metaphysics. I mean, it comes out of the whole, Enlightenment ethos of denying metaphysics with Kant and Hume and Locke. So, at a certain point, I think in people's intellectual, ideological, and ultimately spiritual journey, where you have to kind of choose at a fork in the road, right? Like, how are you going to account for all this, all the forces of the market? You know what I mean? So, I mean, come on, right? There's obviously something nasty and spiritual going on with all the insane BS that, is happening in the world. It doesn't, you can't account for it by freaking, Adam Smith's market forces stuff.
Have you seen Aman Jabi at all? Do you know who that guy is? He was a Silicon Valley guy.
I don't know who that is. Huh.
He lives like in Montana now. Like he worked for Sun Microsystems at one point, but he's done a lot of stuff talking about the technology and how it's being used and everything like that. But this is a guy who grew up in India, came over here, went to Stanford, worked for a lot of the Silicon Valley biggies. Like they even wanted him to work for Snapchat at one point, but now he lives up in northern Montana and renounced his citizenship too at this point. I'm not I mean, he's a really smart guy, but he's he even said that he is now recognizing as a person that's an atheist. He grew up as a Sikh and he moved away from that, but like there's something going on here. He hasn't completely crossed over into accepting that, but it's funny to me, and that's sort of like why I came to Orthodoxy. My quest for truth, you know, like as I found some of the things that you had proposed and you were showing again tragedy and hope, but then you start exploring a lot of these other things, then you find out too what's the truth, the logos. You know, what is who not just what, but who is the logos, you know, and that's a whole other paradigm. Once you can accept that, then it's like it makes it so much easier to see the madness around you and just be like, oh, well, that's kind of expected, you know, like you've rejected God, so this is what happens.
Yeah. I think that more and more it's really hard to deny the reality of evil, and when we see evil, like, you know, the natural conclusion is, well, there's got to be good, right? I don't mean that I don't even mean that like a Manichaean Gnostic sense, like they're both equivalent forces. I mean, evil is a negation and a privation of the good. So it doesn't have ontological being, but it does have reality in the sense of it being an actual, you know, there is good and there is evil. And when people start to realize that, I think that, you know, it forces you to re-examine your paradigm. And for a lot of people, it is difficult. Like it is hard to have your paradigm crushed, right? But I mean, it's also good to go through though, right? Like for me, you know, one of the reasons I didn't ever go in the military was in 2003 when I started looking into, you know, the Big 9 event. So, you know, that was the first thing that really interested me in big scale geopolitics. And I mean, I wasn't very sophisticated. I was like, I don't know, 22, something like that, somewhere in that age range. But it did start, you know, I started thinking, well, like what so if this is Muslims doing this, like why do they want to destroy the World Trade Tower? why is this happening? What does it mean? And I was raised normie GOP, you know, military family, so I just was like, yeah, Bush is a good guy, right? Isn't he a Christian? And that got me, and then I heard about Skull and Bones. And so, you know, if you want a classic intelligence, you know, occult society overlap, like the classic one is Skull and Bones. So I remember hearing about this, and it would come out at the time, because if you remember, Bush and Kerry were running and they were both Skull and Bones.
Yeah.
And I remember that was it was even in the news. They were talking about it. I'm like, what the heck is Skull and Bones? What does that mean? So I got that Anthony Sutton book on Skull and Bones, and I started reading that, and I'm like, oh, this is that same conspiracy stuff I've been looking at. Like, oh, so they're part of the same intelligence, and this is where the OSS and the CIA come out of. They come out, and so it's like, wait a minute. So if the, you know, old school WASP networks are where we're getting where we're getting CIA from, and that's the, you know, Yale, Harvard, Eastern Seaboard elite. Like, come on, obviously these people, they don't have my best interest, right? Why would I think that these people have my best interest? And then you learn about like the ritual that they go through where they, you know, where they're getting pissed on and, you know, rolling in mud and confessing their sins while they jerk off in a coffin. I mean, just what the heck is this, right? Like how are these people interested in it? These people seem nuts. So that, I mean, let's not forget Skull and Bones is what I'm trying to say, right? This is the classic example.
Well, and then, you know, how many, all of our institutions, our elite schools and everything like that, like these people go through these, that's the breeding grounds for them. Like, let's figure out if we can allow them to move up. You know, the idea, like, it's not that you can't at a certain level move up, but you're only going to reach so many levels. Sort of like even with the Masons, the way they do it, right? You know, like you can become a Mason until you prove yourself to us that like you're willing to compromise yourself. You may only progress so far, and that's the same way our society is. But it's blood too as well. You know, obviously, like the Bushes, you know, like they come on, Jeb Bush, low energy Jeb, please clap. Like that guy wouldn't be there if he wasn't for Prescott. You know, like your family established something for you. And I think it's funny to see the fakeness, like so much of the media, the world is a stage for these people. I mean, honestly, like I couldn't imagine living their life and having to go out day in and day out and lie the way they have to.
Isn't that
That's
weird? Remember when Hillary came to the South back when she was running? And
y'all
she
want
was
some hot sauce?
Hey, y'all.
We're
I got
just
hot
chilling.
sauce in my purse all the time.
We're just
Like,
chilling in
what?
Cedar Rapids.
And people believe
Yeah.
that stuff too. I mean, but that's what's so scary, and that's what's hard sometimes because you can see, how easy it works, and you just like, okay, I got to resist doing that because it's so easy to manipulate people if I want to, because you can see the framework for it. You see the matrix for what it is.
Yeah.
Well, right
Yeah,
on,
it's-
man.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, just trying to think of more examples of, the overlap between the occult. I mean, we've forgotten the classic example of Crowley himself, because Crowley was British intelligence.
Yep.
Yeah, he was a
Well,
British
that's
intelligence asset who was basically, they would kind of use him off and on for various things. And so in World War One, he was used to do agitprop. So he would go out there and do like, anti-German agitprop stuff for the Brits. And then he was used by who was it? The Dennis Wheatley, who was the British intelligence a handler guy who was he wrote the occult spy fiction novels, like the movie that has Christopher Lee in it. It's worth watching because the villain in that, Mokata, he's actually based on Crowley. Devil Rides Out. That's it. If you watch that movie with Christopher Lee, you'll notice that and that's actually about a satanic cult, like mind controlling young women, right? So I recommend watching that because this gives you an insight into like the modus operandi British intelligence as well. Because Wheatley is the one, together with Maxwell Knight, who they loved Crowley. They thought he was so cool. And Maxwell Knight is part of the reason why Bond's handler's M. It's also Mansfield Cummings, because he would write C as his signature, just like John Dee had the signature of 007. Cummings would write C. And then when Fleming wrote the Bond stuff, he combined that with Maxwell Knight, who's hence the M. But they're all buddies with Crowley. Now, Ian Fleming didn't know Crowley. He never met him, but he knew about him because of this sort of, rumor and the press of him being the wickedest man in the world and being the beast and all this stuff. But Crowley was, as you said, closer to a lot of these other British intelligence guys who were using him, and they used him to do the go-between with, the Nazis to get what's his face to fly into Scotland and all that. So, point being is that that Crowley's another classic example of the overlap of intelligence and the occult.
Weren't some of the neo-Marxist, or the guys from the Frankfurt School, weren't they like going down also to Italy, where some of the stuff where Crowley was molesting kids? I thought like they were
The Abbey of
involved.
Thelema.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I'm not sure. I wouldn't be surprised. I'm trying to think. I can't remember if I've read into Frankfurt School guys doing that, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I thought it's like Marcuse and some of the other ones. I thought they
Interesting.
were there. But this is one of those things I'm digging in my brain here. It just came to me.
Oh, I mean, yeah, that sounds right. I just don't remember. Like,
yeah. So don't quote me on it, please. Descendants of Crowley, don't sue me, please.
yeah, like I was just reading the other day in that Spence book on Crowley's intelligence work that I didn't even realize that like he and Aldous Huxley were partying all the time. Like I knew they knew each other, but I didn't realize they were like partying.
I didn't know that.
Together. Yeah, they were.
I'd
they
read
were
that somewhere. Like,
yeah, they were tripping and partying together. It's pretty wild.
That is so insane.
Yeah.
It's
But
a
you know what?
small
It's like,
world
it's one
when
of
it
those
comes
things-
to that. Yeah.
Well, yeah. But that's the thing too, is like when you first hear it, like it hits that insane thing on me, but then I'm like, no, that makes sense. Yeah, that figures.
It does, and I mean, I don't know that Huxley was I don't know that he was British intelligence, but basically everybody he's around is. So that's all the same circles.
Yeah. And then Julian, his brother, and then there was another brother too, as well, right?
It's another one. I thought he was a brother. He's not. He's like a
Oh.
cousin or something. But
Oh.
he was doing MKulture stuff in Australia.
Yeah,
And
just look at how Australia is now. Like,
no, that's partly why. Yeah,
Yeah.
like I didn't even, dude. I've been reading about MKulture stuff for
Yeah.
15, 20 years, and I just last year came across that dude's kind of random small book on MKulture in Australia. That was a whole other. I had no idea. Basically, like the whole Australian establishment is just wicked, dude. I mean, they've been wicked for a long time. They were doing insane stuff in Australia, dude, for MKulture.
There was that thing too that you had found where the guy had written in the like early 2000s or 2010 or whatever, where he'd written that thing about like what he was involved with, like he was a lower level person involved with the government.
Oh,
but
that's the Satanist from Australia. Yeah. He died in somewhere in the 2010s.
I thought he died a little bit shortly after he had came out with that, right?
And the craziest part of that is like, you're gonna see shit go down in Australia, and you'll know that I'm telling you the truth. So, like, I've always thought, yeah, that's like, I think that dude's probably mostly legit because he was right. And I mean, obviously you can't take every one of these occultist Satanist people at their word, because they constantly lie and they'll beef up their own stories and their history. But
yeah,
I mean, that one seemed to come true. Like, he's like, yeah, we basically, the majority of the Australian government's satanic, and there's nothing you can do about it. And you're gonna see the NWO clamp down on Australia. And he wrote that in I don't remember the exact date, like 28, 9, 10, 11, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
But by the way, like, if you go looking for it, it's you have to use way back. Like, you can't find the full essay. Like, the full one, it's like 20 pages and really crazy.
Okay. I haven't read the full one. I've only read.
Yeah, usually what comes up is like the abridged, like few page version. But the full 20-page one's really wild.
Well, even with like the Wayback Machine, they've been attacking that as well, to like all the stuff that has been like documented and saved. That it's like, I know within the last couple of years they've been attacking some of those servers, because then it makes it perfect. It's like, we talk about all these things and they've been well documented, then you only have a bridge version, so then it's just like, see, they're crazy, it's only a 3-4 page paper, like, and then it just works into that psyop and into.
This is what Richard said. Richard Grove said a long time ago. Like, just watch. Like, the whole internet's going to be like Fahrenheit 451. All this electronic stuff can be deleted and scrubbed. So he was actually, Richard was saying that in like 2010. So.
Well, who's that? There's that crazy woman that writes for New York. Writes for New York Times and had been like part of BuzzFeed, but she's Washington Post. She's like that hit woman for the Washington Post, but like her uncle owns the archive, the Internet Archive.
Oh, and
wow! Yeah, I can't remember her name.
But that's right.
She's the one that went after the woman for the libs of TikTok and everything like that. And so, like, whenever there's anything that's controversial about her, her uncle would remove it from there, because they're like a multimillionaire, billionaire family and everything like that. Mm-hmm. But then as well, like, she had a direct line with Twitter. She was one of those people that, like,
Kate Mayo?
No.
Yeah,
man. Oh man. Because she's the one that showed up at the libs of TikTok home. Typing one arm.
Yeah, I can't remember, because I remember I saw that as well, and I think you guys were the ones who posted it, but it was talking about any connection to that. Yeah, there was a lot of things being deleted during that time. It was like the last 2 years. Like, it's been like pretty. Oh, it started like
Taylor Lorenz.
Lorenz. There you go.
That's who it is. Yeah. And that's totally her job, is to play like, oh, they're so mean to me, and then turn around and just go hardcore on people. And then also, hey, my uncle will eliminate this from the Internet Archive because he owns it.
Wow.
Cool. Yeah, man, it's so insane. Again, the web is small. Like, they're all connected to one another. Well, right
Yeah,
on,
I
man.
think I go up. It's actually a fairly small clique, that call a lot of the shots. I mean, I don't know that, I'm not saying they run the whole world, but yeah, this is basically the Kissinger group, the Rothkopf managerial class, and then there's like the inner super rich families. So pretty transparent. It's not that hard to figure that out. But yeah, I mean, it's weird that so much information can kind of be in everybody's face, hidden in plain sight, but you still have so many normies and people that they just can't come to grips with it. And I think deep down, it's like they can't go there because they know that it would collapse their whole made up paradigm. And that fear, I think, is why many people, won't go in these directions.
Well, yeah, it hurts the ego to face that reality, like you've talked about
Yeah.
before. I mean, it's hard to do, and that's also, I think, one of the strengths of orthodoxy. Again, I'm not trying to be an orthodox Bible beater here, but I mean, it's the truth. That's part of why I found my way to where I am.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, is there any more? I'm not trying to change subject. I'm just trying to think of occult overlaps with. You could probably go back to even like the Templars. I mean, it's hard to know exactly what the Templars. I'm not trying to change subject, but
no,
I'm
that's good.
Just thinking like overlaps of. I mean, something happened with the Templars. I don't really know what it was, but they definitely had some kind of alteration or change, which led to them getting, excommunicated and attacked by, the Roman Catholic Council at that time. It was the Council of Vienne, I think. And the King of France and the papacy, right? Obviously, they flipped and turned on the Templars. And then you do have this tradition of some kind of Gnostic philosophy amongst the Templars, and the idea of these, I don't know what to call it, but I've always thought that there's something going on with that in regard to, remember Breivik?
Yep.
And remember Breivik wearing all his Templar garb and manifesto.
He holds like the second highest record right now, right?
Probably.
Yeah.
But he made a big deal out of like, oh, I'm a Templar, and my Masonic degrees of being a Templar has equipped me to save Western civilization, and remember all that stuff.
Yeah. That was in where was it? It wasn't in Sweden, but it was somewhere up in that that region. Yep.
But I mean, I think there's something going on with that. I mean, a high level Masonic dude saying that he's commissioned to save Western civilization as a Templar. I mean, come on. And nobody made a big deal about that. I mean, people like Alex were talking about it, but like the rest of, nobody even thought to inquire into the Templar claims and all that. Was it Colby, one of the Roman Catholic CIA directors? It might have been Casey, maybe William Casey, right? Like they were talking about some of their elite guys as Templars. You know what I'm talking about?
I've heard
I
it,
don't know about that.
but it's been a minute since I've gone down that route, because that I connected the same thing within some certain like the crossover between Masons and Templars, which was the thing was in Norway actually with Breivik. Yeah. And the other thing that oddly kept coming up too was that every time like some big events like that were happening, there was always a lodge like fairly oddly close to a lot of these places, which was like another thing too. It's like they're probably operating bases, like allegedly, right? And but it always seemed just kind of coincidentally that it's always around a lodge.
Yeah, well, and the reason that's relevant is that when you go into the history of Gladio and all that kind of stuff. And by the way, when I critique Gladio, it doesn't mean I'm a communist. Every time I say that, people, oh, he's a communist. So I can't talk about the alliance of papacy and organized crime and the CIA without being a Soviet. I mean, it's just crazy. But I mean, it shows that level of corruption, because Casey was involved in this too, because he was like a hardcore trad cat, and he was at Fordham, right? And this is why Fordham is
Fordham.
Yeah, this is why Fordham is one of these pushing all this like crazy Ecumenist, Ukraine schism stuff that's a long time Jesuit CIA thing.
Well, but that's what's interesting though too, because going back to John Dee, that's what he said, that the angels that he was talking to, the demons, were saying that they were going to create an Abrahamic, a single Abrahamic religion, which we're starting to see. Was it in UAE starting to come to fruition?
Yeah, ecumenist. Yeah, it's like an ecumenist. Exactly. Yeah, ecumenism. Actually, people don't know this. It actually comes out of Renaissance Neoplatonism.
Yeah.
People think that, oh, it's like a 20th 1900s liberal movement. I mean, you can trace the modern ecumenist movement to the money of the Rockefeller family 100%, but actually you go back further to the ideological predecessors to ecumenism, and it goes back to Renaissance magic, Renaissance occultism, because in the Renaissance you had a lot of these figures like the Medici's, Pico della Mirandola, and these characters. They're actually pushing for. There's a bunch of them actually. Lorenzo, I don't think Valla was doing that. That if you read Hoffman's book, Occult Renaissance Church of Rome, he actually traces all of those Renaissance guys that were pushing proto-ecumenism. And you're absolutely right. That's why John Dee, because John Dee's into Renaissance magic stuff, right? Mm-hmm. That's why John Dee is saying that, yeah, through Neoplatonism and all these kinds of things, we can create a new monotheistic supra religion.
More ways to control people, and just kind of you have them under that same umbrella. That just, yeah. Man, like I don't know how, like, just it's. You said it best, you know what I mean? Out of all people, it's just like you kind of start from one place and you start understanding how these people get into control, how they get into positions, what groups are they in, and you follow and trace the money, and it's just like you keep following, and then it all kind of adds up. But yeah, it once you see the big picture and you peek behind that curtain, it's just like you have to understand that all these things are in place for that reason. So this is how we've gotten this far through all these, like, this society, the secret societies, Skull and Bones, but it's all linked back to that other metaphysical thing that people don't understand, of the good versus evil. Yeah, I think
following the money is always good for kind of that geopolitical level of stuff, but you can also follow the ideology, right? Following the ideology will take you to what you're talking about, like how do we get to where we are in terms of the thinking? I mean, it's not all, it's not merely money. I'm not saying you're saying that, but a lot of people just, they restrict themselves to thinking that, oh, it's all just money and power and they just want oil. And I mean, that is part of it, but it goes beyond that, because it's not just a matter of controlling resources. It's also a notion of pushing ideology. I mean, when the U.S. pushes ideology through soft power, right, it's doing that to prime the pump and warm people up to the energy control. That's true. Like, but it's not just that, it's also culture war too, right? Like the U.S. has to push Americanism so that people are willing to so they want Subway and abortion and Pepsi, right?
Yeah, and even like going back to Michael Aquino, he says that openly too, like full military tactics, knowing your enemy, policies, their structure, their politics, religion, and devising a plan to infiltrate, like, and subvert and completely destroy that and use to appease U.S. interests. And it's like they say it. It's like, yeah, we're going to take over everything. We're going to make it seem like it's your idea that you want it by continuously blasting it on TV, commercials, movies. And it's just a slow destruction of, like, what you think is normal by constantly putting in your face. And it's like, and I know people say, like, the slippery slope doesn't exist, but it's like you add little bit of elements and you normalize it little by little to eventually, like, now it's gotten to a point that it's like to where we are now. But yeah, they've openly admitted they're going to do all these things. And then even just they send money and we go overseas to the women's liberation movement in Afghanistan or Iran, and like transgender studies for Lebanese women and stuff. And you're like, like, what is this even doing?
$500,000 for somebody in Pakistan if they speak English and they're transgender, in like the latest budget that Biden proposed.
Whoa.
And it's like back in the day, you would hear, and someone made a meme of it where it's like some Muslim dudes like, America's the great Satan, and you're like, nah. And then now it's like, actually, you might have a point. Like, actually, Yeah, not that they're still right in their ideology, but when it comes to at least that aspect, it's just like, and even for me being overseas, there's a lot of stuff that like I struggled with for a long time because it's like there's a huge like pedophilia issue going on in Afghanistan, especially when it comes to like they have things called chai boys where they come bring you tea, but they're also for entertainment, and it's like we knew it was happening, but our superiors would tell us, "Hey, yeah, you can't do anything about it." I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean, bro? I thought we're the good guys here. What are we doing? And yeah, it you become disillusioned, and like that for me was already kind of like I'm like, man, what are we really doing here? But
Well, then it got to a point where the CIA was giving Viagra to warlords so that they could continue to rape more little boys. Like that's the point we reached in Afghanistan.
Are you serious? I've never heard of
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. Like I think starting around like 2011, 2012, they were giving the little blue pill to the warlords over there just so they could rape more boys.
I mean, I honestly wouldn't be surprised because it's like they would try to offer them up to us, or they would try to buy like military members. Like we used to make a joke, like sadly, like because we had this dude, he was like 18, 19, like real young kid. He looked like a porcelain Don, and then like the Afghan dudes were like eyeballing him, and we're like, "Yo, we'll trade you him for a goat," and they're like, "Okay," and then,
Whoa.
like I felt bad because we were joking, but then they took it like real serious. Like, okay, we'll go get it, and we're like, no, Nishta, bro, it's a joke. And
Have you seen those old clips? Alex used to play them all the time of the gay bomb.
I think so. It's been a minute.
So this is some kind of I mean, I don't know if it's completely made up or if they really did develop some kind of biowarfare component, but they were talking about dropping the gay bomb on Saddam and his troops. I'm serious.
No, I believe it.
And
I remember
that.
that.
I think they missed Iraq and they hit us, or like they actually meant to hit us. Right?
Well,
but no, look it up. There's actually mainstream news reports about the Pentagon developing some kind of biowarfare agent that they thought or hoped would like turn all of Saddam's soldiers gay. That they would all. Yeah, it's a real report.
Well, they even have like an operation that they did in Georgia, and I posted it the other day where it's like they got a bunch of mosquitoes, like over like 200,000 female mosquitoes that were non-infected with like yellow fever to see if like you could deploy them and if they would survive to infect the whole area. And this is like military. This is a military operation by the CBRNE, the chemical warfare like portion of the house, and they dropped it in Georgia. And they were trying to see if they would survive, and it's like, yeah, like somewhere around 200,000 survived or something like that. But yeah, they were attacked. Yeah. Like it was like, and then what in Florida, like 2 years ago, they released those mosquitoes as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like
remember Bill Gates? Yeah. Bill Gates did that TED talk where he let them loose, right? Yeah. By the way, if you type into YouTube the Pentagon gay bomb, it comes up in the AP archives. It's the first thing. It's still there. Yeah, you got to look it up. I'm convinced they dropped it on our country, man.
Yeah, it's in the water. You know what I mean?
Well, exactly. that's just what we.
They dropped it on America's water aquifers. Exactly.
And this is why it's good.
And that's why you're eating the bugs. Why aren't you eating the bugs yet? Are you still eating meat? That's bad.
Bro, that Austin was so funny. So, like, I was up there. I don't know if you remember me, but...
I do remember it.
Yeah. So, it was funny just kind of seeing all that. I will not eat the bugs. Like, it was a good time.
They didn't use... Did you watch the Tucker documentary?
No, I didn't see it come out.
Well, it's behind a paywall, but I'll send it to you because... I found a copy of it that I didn't do it. Somebody put it up on Rumble. I'll send it to you. But
cool.
Yeah. Scooter filmed so much, and it got scaled down to like. I mean, I'm not bitching. Like I'm happy to be in it, but it's got scaled down to like 9 or 10 minutes. I mean, he had filmed like hours of stuff, but so basically nothing from the live event made it except for the chants, like the chanting of the "I will not eat the bugs." That made it in there, but nothing else made it.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Did you see the clip of me as Klaus? That was the funnest part.
Yeah, I did
that
see
was
that.
Awesome.
And you know what's funny about that is that there was like at least 2 hours of content that we filmed that day at the park. There was so many funny reactions that didn't make it into the final cut. But I wish
asked
that
them to maybe like send it to you so you can kind of do like your own release, like
he can't. It's all owned by Fox, so but. I'm only able to get away with, I think, posting like the little clips from the promos. So
Gotcha.
I don't think they care about the promo stuff, but
Yeah, you got to
but yeah, there were so many funny reactions that that didn't make it in there.
that Ava, what is her name? That hottie smart Dutch woman. Ava Vlark.
Vanderbork, something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, and she's like a tradcath now too, right? Like she just joined up with that. We got to get her.
I tried to reach out to her to do an interview, and she was like, "Yeah, I'll do it," and then she ghosted me. So I don't think she wants to sit. She heard that she probably saw the Tradcat debates and decided no.
She saw you destroy Nick Fuentes, and she's like, "Oh no, I can't do it."
It's funny because I get every now and then I'll get people that ghost me, and I'm like the Kitco News was like they reached out and they're like, hey, let's do an interview, and I'm like, are you sure? And they're like, yeah. And then I think they looked more into what I talk about, and then I never heard back.
You shouldn't like tell them anything next time. Like, oh yeah, sure, here, let's give you a date, and then by that time it'll be too late. Like,
yeah. So I think a lot of people, yeah, they reach out and then they don't really know what all else we talk about. It's weird too because you never know what they're seeing. Like they might see me, acting completely retarded in a clip, and they're like, "How is this guy going to talk about economic stuff? He's acting like a retard."
He's asking for.
But actually, I like it that way. Right?
Like...
it's fun that way. Yeah.
I was like, yeah, you got to keep it balanced because if not, like, it's just if it's too much, then people are just even like you said, it's like sometimes you get bored and it's like sometimes you just got to go off on a tangent.
Well, right on, man. We've gone for a couple hours. Do you want to start? Can we wind it down here a bit? Do you mind?
Sure. Yeah, that's good.
Cool, man. No, I mean, I'd love to do another one of these in the future, man. This has been great. Like finally talking to you after a few years of just sending messages back and forth and you sharing our memes. And, it's funny too, because I can't share much anymore because I only log in through the browser. I don't even log in through the app anymore. After that last time I got zapped, I don't even do that. I'm limiting my exposure to apps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm actually thinking about we were thinking about actually going back to flip phones because I'm thinking, do I actually need this cell phone with me at all times? Not really. And most of what I do, I would prefer actually to like have a designated time to do it during the day on the computer, and then get rid of this stupid ass, flip phone. I mean, a smartphone.
Yes. Yeah. There's there's a bunch of people at my church that have shifted over to the dumb phones,
Interesting. Yeah. Jamie and I have been talking about doing that. I think we may do it.
Because I was thinking of having that as my primary, the dumb phone. And again, there may be a certain time of day because for some of the work I do to log into things at times, I've got to have that authenticator. And so I have to have a phone. But, I can have it exclusively for that. Working hours, done.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even then just having the smartphone for Wi-Fi. So then whenever, if you're not really ever using, if you're at home or whatever, but yeah, I have a dumb phone that I probably got to go dig out of my garage, but yeah.
So
I definitely agree on that.
That's something I didn't think about. So if I don't have a cell phone number attached to the authenticator, is that going to screw up everything?
I don't know. I mean, if you've got two-factor on, you've got to have some way to do the two-factor. You might be able to do it through email because it's some of the two-factor authentication. You could have an email address, so you could possibly do it that way. But if you've got it set up just to be with the Google Authenticator, I don't know that you can do that online. I think you have to do that through the phone.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah, no, they're always going to find a way to kind of make you part of the system, aren't they?
Unless you get the authenticator through your computer, I know, which still is kind of trash, but it's not on your phone. You know what I mean? I think they have an app like that as well, maybe for Mac. I'm not 100% sure. It's been a minute since I've revisited that because it's on my phone as well. That's what I use for social media. Yeah.
I'm sure there's some way to figure out how to get around that and stop doing it. But I mean, you could turn the two-factor stuff off, or you could switch it, like you said, to email or something like that. But yeah, it's always a giant hassle, all this stuff.
For sure, man.
All right. Well, thank you guys.
You
guys, a pleasure.
For taking the time today, man. I mean, really, definitely appreciate it, man. And sometime down the road, I'd love to do another one.
Yeah, we should. I mean, I knew we would have a good conversation. You guys are sharp, and the lay of the land when it comes to geopolitics and what's going on in there. So thank you guys for having me.
Oh no, man. Glory to God. Thank you,
Yeah,
man.
thank you, bro.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. Awesome, man.
Yeah, send me this when it's up, and I'll reshare it if you don't mind.
Yep.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely, bro.
And
Cool.
can I plug my stuff?
Yeah, please go ahead,
yeah,
man.
please plug everything.
Yeah, so I'll try not to do this. It's too long. I know it's annoying when people ramble about the plugs. So basically, you can follow me at jaysonalsis.com, my website. The shop is there. The membership section is there. You can subscribe for pennies on the dollar. We have a big live event coming up June 3rd or 4th in Nashville. You can get tickets at the website. Under every post is the list of live events. We got July 6th with Jamie Kennedy, 5 hours of shenanigans in Van Nuys Airport, LA. We've got a Comic-Con where I'll be doing a panel speaking in Kentucky. We got an Orthodox pilgrimage. So if people are interested in going to Italy on an Orthodox Italy pilgrimage with me and my priest, Father Vladimir, you can get information on that at the website or at his website, which is linked on all my social media. Hopefully, if you guys want to, you guys can come to that. I'll give you the link and you can share that too if anybody's interested in. I think it's 14 days in Italy, going to like 10 different Orthodox. So basically, it's Orthodox Christianity before papism in Italy. So we'll be going to all the sites that would be relevant to that. We'll also do some, like the Vatican, that kind of stuff. But it's going to be a really cool pilgrimage. He's trying to keep the costs down and keep it nice. So if you guys are interested in that, it's November 5th to 18th. If anybody wants to come to that, information is at my website. Yeah, that's it.
Awesome. Great, man. All right. And thanks again. And thanks everyone for tuning in.
Also, my sponsor is shock.com. Use the promo code
Oh.
J50.
You know what? No. Wait. I gotta ask you, man. Like, I've seen that chalk stuff. Does it work?
I have some.
Yes.
Yeah, he gave me some at the show, so yeah, it's good.
Like I take the Tomcat Elite. It does. It'll increase your toxic masculinity. I'll put it that way.
I need some toxicity in my life, so I have to check it out.
Exactly. So yeah, promo code J50 at chog.com if you want to get that.
All right.
All right, thanks guys. Get it.
Yeah.
Thanks. All right. This is PBF, and we are out. To the top.